Hello, everyone. Welcome to the stream. Now, hilariously, because this is a stream where I did some advanced promotion and I'm talking about a game that people are really excited about, my camera isn't working, so you can't see me as I thoughtfully ponder or excitedly gesticulate throughout this stream. If you want some examples of what that might look like, you can check out other read-through review streams that I've done. If you've already seen me at other events, you may be able to fill in with your own mental picture of Mike being excited and thoughtful about RPGs. But I apologize that I cannot bring you the real live feed today. So I'll just try to do it as best I can by talking here. So today we are going to look at the Ashcan edition of Realis by Austin Walker, with additional design by Jack DeKeat, additional writing by Janine Hawkins, cover art by Oddask, interior art by Sam Beck, and book design by Tyler Crumrine, published by Possible Worlds Games. So for those that don't know Austin's work, I've been following Austin as a creator since probably 2015 or early 2016, when I saw him on an Apocalypse World actual play, and then from there, started following Waypoint when it got started, got into Friends at the Table, and have been, a viewer and fan of his various work off and on across the time since then. So I'm very excited to see Realis come to this Ashcan edition. I had the chance to listen to the kind of preview tutorial podcast that Austin and Jack did on the Friends at the Table feed. So I have what I feel like is a pretty decent sense of the basics of Realis, and I'm going to try to go over those as best I can, and then also look at and talk through some of the more complicated or more advanced elements of the game to try to round out my understanding and command of the Ashcan as it is, until I get to the point where I can actually play the game, because that's always going to be the best way to really understand what's going on in a game. You can buy this Ashcan edition right now at itch.io, and I'm going to grab that link real quick unless someone beats me to it. And that is thecalcutech.itch.io/Realis. You can also go to the Possible Worlds Games website at www.possibleworldgames.com, and it'll be listed there. This is Ashcan edition, which, if you're not familiar with the term Ashcan, I mostly know it from the world of comics, when someone would publish kind of an incomplete or a rough version to have something to show or to kind of establish publication in terms of like claiming IP rights. And in the RPG world, an Ashcan is often a early and or incomplete edition that might be the only edition that a game gets, or it might be the kind of proof of concept that will get you a publisher, or you can sell to kind of fund ongoing development and things like that. So that's the tradition in which I'm viewing this Ashcan here. Because this is a work for sale and not like a free quick start edition, I'm going to try and be cognizant of not showing too much of the book at any given time, so that I'm kind of not giving away a paid product when I'm looking and doing analysis here. So that means probably skimming over some sections, and I may intentionally leave out some parts of the book so that this stream does not provide too comprehensive a look at the interior material, because I would certainly very much rather people go and buy the book if they can. If you're not in a position to be able to buy it right now, I'm going to try and talk about it as best I can, and then you'll be able to listen to folks playing Realis on the Friends of the Table feed. I think at least first arc or first month worth of Friends of the Table's game of Realis will be available for free on that public feed, and then that'll give you a better sense of the game. itch.io has the possibility for community copies. I have no professional relationship with Austin, aside from like one DM at some point years ago when I was in a previous job, and I've talked with Tyler at a couple cons, but I have no active professional connection with any of them in terms of like representing possible worlds or representing Austin. So I don't know the plans any better than anybody else. You'll want to follow them directly for what's going on. For those that don't know me, right, if you're here because you follow Austin or Friends at the Table or Possible Worlds, my name is Mike. I use they and he pronouns. I'm a author, podcaster, and so it used to be author, podcaster, and actual play creator. Now it's author, game designer, and actual play producer because I've shifted more of my attention into game design. My last project was working as a designer on Daggerheart, the forthcoming fantasy RPG from Darrington Press. There were a number of designers on the project, and I worked for Darrington freelance as a designer on that project, which was very fun. And I'm excited for Daggerheart's release later this spring so that folks will get to play the final version that is something I'm very excited about and proud of. And with all of that, let's dive into this book. So, this uses the Explorer's Design template, which some indie RPG folks may already recognize or be excited to follow. And let's get into this. So, this universe prizes passivity except after wisdom gained, recognizes friendship's strength, but rewards solitary achievement. Hello, Trivia Mats. This universe shifts in scope and scale according to the needs of the story or the whims of its tellers. Demands honesty and consequences, but care at the table. It is an inverted Twilight mirage, psychedelic space and sword and sorcery, mumbling mystics at a castle observatory, meteors cleaved clean with broadswords, 1,000 moons in fatal orbit with an unreachable world called Realis. That's some Austin Walker prose there. Not disappointed in the least. So here we get some art and our first play example. So right, even before a more like traditional, this is what this game is, introduction, we get a quick example of play, right? This is the conversation. We've got some back and forth, and then the player flags, my descent suit gives me the +1 sentence. When moving through the darkness, I always evade traps that bar my way. And then this player kind of describes how they see that sentence, these means that the character has, applying to the fiction, right? So this is a fiction-first game, which means that we stay mostly in the conversation, in thinking about the world of the story and how the story is playing out. And then we recognize when we need to bring in game mechanics, as opposed to thinking about game mechanics first. Like, oh, I want to use this ability, so I'm going to say I use this ability, and then we figure out how I use it. We try to, in a fiction-first game, build from the fiction to the mechanics, or notice when the mechanics apply based on what's happening in the fiction, right? A fictional trigger is another way that we talk about how the mechanics come into play. And so this gives us a sense of some of the vibe of the setting here, right? We have the idea of an orphan vessel, which is a sentient ship, as I learned from the two-person game yesterday. We've got this vessel. We've got back and forth with the GM. There's some PCs. The GM says, of all the 1,000 moons of Realis, it is said that Yazarin is the hardest to reach, not only because its coordinates are ever uncertain, but because it is orbited by a countless sea of diamond-sharp caltrops, right? So that's presenting an obstacle or a challenge. The GM is not flagging it immediately as so, just saying, hey, this is some fiction that you should know about, that your characters are going to have to consider when you're moving forward, right? And then Casey, the player of Atarak, says, oh, well, I have the means for this, right? My descent suit gives me this sentence. The GM accepts it, right? And we're progressing forward. So this is like it's not quite an abilities in terms of showing you the basic version of everything, but it does seem to be like a complete exchange within how a game could play. And over here, we've got some cool wild art. There is not a ton of art in this Ashcan, which is very understandable, but it's all really good. And so that's already exciting. art is a great way of conveying a vibe and the tone that the game either assumes or is hoping to support the players in evoking. So having a little bit of art can go a long way here, which is great. Right, so we have an introduction to Realis. Realis is both a place and a game, right? It is a place, a cursed orbital sphere of 1,000 mystical moons, and a game, one of collaborative storytelling in a world of mystery, magic, and impossible technology. We have some sidebars here, which are another place to get some evocative and strange prose, right? This is kind of diegetic for Realis itself. Over on page 7, the editors of this volume demand we limit our words regarding the so-called mechanologica and their heinous philosophy. More dreadful it is than any Empest Queen Commander, right? We're just getting some fiction, right? This is not surprising given the kind of epigraph or type openings that are in a lot of episodes of Friends at the Table, right? Where there's epistolary or historical or encyclopedic material that is all within the fiction, right? It is diegetic, and it helps us be grounded in the place and the tone and the vibe of what's going on. So there's an interesting parallel here. It's not a perfect parallel, but there is some parallel here between Realis, a game created by Austin Walker, the host of Friends at the Table, a prominent actual play show, and Daggerheart, a RPG created in part by Matt Mercer, the primary GM and one of the kind of principal performers of Critical Role. Scale is different, the creative intention is different, but something I'm bringing to this stream is thinking about Realis as a game to play at personal tables and a game that will be deployed and already has been deployed as actual play, and what kind of how creating and thinking about actual play may inform some design decisions here, right? I'm guessing as to intent, except in places where intent has been specifically declared and I remember it, right? I may misinterpret or misunderstand some things here. So big takeaways. On the setting side, we get some lovely proper nouns. We have the titular Realis. We have saint-like radiance, the corpse sun, I should enunciate even better, and the great void. We have the imperial empest, the Leo Caesaranity, the Zvezd Lyceum, and the Renostica, right? Lovely, evocative science fantasy bullshit. And I say bullshit here with great affection and admiration. So you can read more about the Moons of Realis on page 78, right? So we're introducing a bit of the setting and we're saying, hey, there's more later on because we probably want to introduce the game part, right? And now the game part. As a game, Realis is a set of rules that shapes conversation into an engine for collaborative storytelling, right? So collaborative storytelling is flagged right away. You will tell the story of a band, capital B band, of protagonists called player characters who use powerful sentences as they explore, love, fight, worship, and unfold their stories across the 1,000 moons. Realis is designed to explore how these characters, which begin iconic and archetypal, become increasingly specific over the length of a story, and it is interested in the power and vulnerability present in such a transformation, right? So this paragraph says, this is what this game is. This is what we, parentheses, the designers and creators of this game, set out for this game to do. Realis is designed to explore so and so and so forth, and is interested in the power and vulnerability present in a transformation. Something that Walker has talked about in the interview over at Rascal that you can read. It's a 2-part interview with Chase Carter, who's one of the co-founders there, and in some of the discussion that that Walker has in the 2-person introduction, right, is that this is a game that is like subtractive or is about honing, right? Honing is a game mechanic in Realis. right? We have a archetypal character becomes specific as their broad abilities narrow down, right? As they get, we can either say that they get refined or that they get cut down or that they hone in on who they want to be. Austin uses a metaphor of sculpting in one or the other of these kind of introductory discussions, where when you're sculpting, the piece emerges as a result of a process of subtraction, right? You are removing that which is not the sculpture. So that mentality seems to be pretty solidly built into the foundation of the creative intent in this game. Something that I see in the second paragraph on the right here: while most players will take control of a single member, we'll have a game master, right? So that's a fairly frequent and common division. But everyone who plays Realis is a storyteller. And though there are different roles in play, everyone's first duty is enter into good faith collaboration with everyone else at the table. Right? So those are two big things right away. This is the game sculpty business. Indeed, hi, Unscriven. Everybody is a storyteller, right? This is not a thing. This is not a game where you have the GM as storyteller and the players as audience, or the players as kind of reactive individuals with like limited agency, right? Everyone is responsible for moving the story forward. There are RPGs where the GM equivalent player is named the storyteller, right? That's the storyteller system or the storytelling system. Realis says everyone's a storyteller. And we again get a reference to collaboration, and we have discussion of good faith, right? In a game like Blades in the Dark, one of the player principles is don't be a weasel, right? Basically, don't do something in bad faith because it will get you an advantage. Realis is asking us all to play in good faith and to trust and invest in one another, some degree of equality and authority, even though the GM's authority is going to be broader. Something that Austin flagged in the two-player kind of demo game was that Realis is not as asymmetrical as some games that Friends of the Table has played. The way that a GM will interact and kind of mechanically present challenges to players is going to be pretty similar to the way that players using their player characters will be to kind of mechanically exert their will on the setting, right? We're mostly using sentences. This is like the basic ludonarrative unit of action. Apologies, I will probably flip-flop between referencing Austin Walker, the designer, as Walker, which is like the slightly more formal thing that I often default to when doing these read-through streams, and Austin, more colloquially, because I have been following Austin Walker's work for 10 years, and that can create a sense of familiarity, even though, as I've said earlier, I have not met Austin in person. So I apologize for any gestures or beats here that are overly familiar. That's my bad, and I'm going to try to be cautious of it. Right. Maybe not a necessary disclaimer, but I want to be respectful. So, sentences, you say? So it's something that's already been mentioned somewhere along the way is that Austin Walker has talked about the fact that his mother is a poet, right? And that attention to language was something that was important growing up. He's also talked about watching movies with his dad, and his dad encouraging him to take notes and then for them to talk about what they liked in a work, right? So writing and an attention to language is something that Austin Walker will refer to often, and looking at Walker's career as a critic and as a actual play creator, this is not too surprising that we end up with kind of like a nerdily literary central game design element. And that's very fun to me as someone who is also a writer. Right? So these sentences assert some aspect of reality, right? For a lot of them, your player character will have sentences that are about their class. So a character might have the sentence, "I always wear the right outfit." These sentences have kind of levels or magnitudes, right? This is the ranks. The highest rank a sentence can be realized to is +3. Realization is the process by which a sentence goes from +0 to +1 or to +1 to +2 and so on and so forth, right? Realis, realization. The Realis mode is a literary mode. I didn't actually know this about the Realis mode thing because I never got super, super deep in a formal study of grammar because that was just not in my experience of the U.S. American education system. And the classes I took in college did not attend closely to that type of formal grammar instruction. So that's just a flag here. So let's go back and cover our bases here. Sentences are the most common type of means, the mechanisms to resolve conflict or uncertainty, right? What means do you bring to this challenge is a thing that Austin Walker talked about. So Unscriven says, so the Realis mood is a superset of the indicative mood. That matches what I recall. I could not tell you what a superset is. So if Unscriven, you know what a superset is, I would love to hear about it. Because like many writers, I internalized a lot of the rules of grammar just from reading a bunch. And it can be fun to have some specific language for things that people already know about. Indicative is a subset of it, not a formal term. Got it, thank you. So we've got our sentences. We've got every class in the game, right? This is a game with classes. Every class begins with a set of 4 sentences, which are unique to them, right? It says 4 unique sentences. They sort of serve like skills, abilities, or moves, but they're not quite, right? This is a statement of the reality of this person. Each of these sentences has a level of reality called a rank, right? +0 to +3. Reality determines how effective a sentence is in conflict with another sentence. Generally speaking, low-rank sentences are broader, but weaker than high-rank sentences. So we flag the rank of these sentences with that +0 to +3, and we have an example of this one sentence at several layers and stages of reality. So +0 is, I always wear the right outfit. When it realizes to rank 1, I always wear the right outfit during important events, right? There is a qualifier that limits and narrows this sentence during important events. At rank 2, I always wear the right outfit during important events which I was invited to, right? So that's 2 aspects of narrowing. Important events which I was invited to, right? So if you are crashing a party and it's important, well, if you weren't invited, you can't assert that you always wear the right outfit. And at rank 3, I always wear the right outfit during important events which a friend invited me to, right? So the change from +2 to +3 is different. I guess it's a little different than some of these other ranks because, right, which I was invited to by a friend, right, is another way we could structure it out to that. The specific wording here is going to be important, but if we're thinking about and trying to understand how the stages of reality apply for these sentences, right, we can look at something and reinterpret another way you might say it if we have some uncertainty about kind of what rank this should actually be. One of the things that it seems like players will want to learn how to do when engaging with Realis is to be able to listen to a sentence and parse its rank just from how it's put together, right? To be able to tell that the Book of Lies always reveals the weakness of those who abuse their power. It's like, okay, Book of Lies always reveals weakness, right? Maybe that's the 0-1, and then abuse their power. Like, well, okay, we might take that as a +1. I think ephemera and some of these other subtypes of means may be a little bit harder to parse in this way versus the class sentences that get refined and realized in maybe like the default process. This is one of the places where I don't have a full command of the system yet, and that's why we're doing this stream here. So different types of sentences we can have, right? A moon sentence, which reflect the unique capacities of the various unaffiliated peoples and locations of Realis. GMs can use moon sentences whenever appropriate, and a player can discharge their token to use one as a means. So discharge their token, right? That's capitalized, which means it's got some gameness to it. It is a mechanic. Other types of sentences will be detailed later on, but here's an example of what they might look like, right? Moon sentence, band sentence, and ephemera. Ephemera is like gear, basically, right? An item. And when you use ephemera, there's a certain number of times you can use their sentences as means, but they will, as long as you still have it, it can still inform the fiction. It just can't be used as a means in this, in the mechanical sense, right? And that's something that was demonstrated in the two-player game that was released to Patreon supporters last night and was streamed last night. I think it's going to show up. It showed up in the main feed for Friends of the Table late last night, is what I recall. And here's a kind of bit that dips back into the fiction, right? A final note. To begin with, all of the sentences in this game have been written by us, the word rights, drawing on our own experience inside of and studying Realis. But as you play, in fact, even now as you read this, you make them yours. This is an act of magic, right? One of the fun sub-themes in this game is the idea that making sentences and kind of articulating and expressing your personal reality through sentences and refining them and honing in on kind of deeper specificity of being is a form of magic, right? We've got science fantasy and word magic, right? We have word rights as a type of magic user. So that's some good literature / fiction / writing is magic kind of thing that can be very fun to play with and is especially fun to play with inside of a game, right? Where we're using words to express and to proceed in making the game happen, right? So that the playing of the game thematically is another way in which we are expressing this type of magic. Here we've got some more art. Right, Session 0. I'm very glad to see that Session 0 as an approach has become popularized pretty broadly in the world of TTRPGs. There's a bunch of different ways of doing Session 0. I like that now a lot of games are saying, here is what we recommend to set you up for success in this game. Because if you have, let's say, 3 hours to do your Session 0, but you are creating characters, coming to understand the setting, figuring out how everybody fits together, and learning the game, right? That can be a lot of things to try to do in one session. And trying to convey the idea that, oh yes, if you have a Session 0, everything will be fine. Oh, well, there's a bunch of different things you can do in Session 0. One of the things that is often important to do is to have your kind of content calibration. So here in Realis, we have foundation sentences, which I think is a cool way of presenting this, right? They say Realis contains multitudes. It can support stories of various types. Ensure everyone at the table has an open and honest conversation about what sort of stories, characters, and content they want to explore at table before play, right? So this is not just what I don't want in this game. It is, here are things I want in this game. All right, so they introduce foundation sentences. As a group, discuss and complete the following prompts, writing as many foundation sentences as you need to feel you need to. Our story always, our story never, our story will, but only with distance and care include blank, right? So this is a flag of things we absolutely want in the game. Our story never is, these are things we absolutely don't want in the game. And the third is this, we can have this, but only in a particular type of way. This parallels some safety tools like lines and veils, right? A line is our story never X. A veil could be expressed as our story will, but only with distance and care include X. And then this is much more like the, I don't remember, there's a bunch of these different tools, right? Our story always is much more like a green flag, right? And then our story never is a red flag, and our story will, but only with distance and care, is a yellow flag. We get the note that tools are useful, but not sufficient in play, right? There's no one safety tool that just by acknowledging its existence prevents problems, right? What I like to do when I'm playing is have a set of safety tools that are about calibrating content ahead of time, and at least one tool that is meant to be deployed in play, right? Whether that is the X card or it is an agreement that if someone says pause or can we take a break, right? That there's some way of expressing during play that play needs to pause or that something needs to be addressed. And the tool in play, I try to think about and work with my tables on, like, what's the easiest thing that we can have? Because in heightened moments, it can be really hard. It could sometimes be hard to, quote unquote, do what you're supposed to, right? Because there's implicit social pressure to just go with it. This, I think, can be especially challenging in like live streams, right? Where there is an outside audience. And there's a bunch of different ways that things can get complicated, right? Sometimes saying something can be hard. So we want to have the idea that you can like cross your arms to make the X for the X card, right? Or you can type something into chat. And that's all going to be a question of what works for you, what are the needs for your table, and things like that. Next, we have some character creation. This suggests flipping through classes. They say classes in Realis begin as broad, clear archetypes. Each consists of a series of sentences which are used to overcome uncertain situations. Over the course of play, as sentences change, these archetypal classes will become increasingly personalized and unique to your specific world, game, and character, right? Again, we have this process of subtraction where you introduce a character as an archetype, and then as you see them in action and as they face challenges, right, they refine and are honed in towards specificity. And that's cool. This also kind of echoes or reflects maybe some of the ways that we engage with media, right? If a character is introduced in a way that kind of positions them in an archetypal fashion, we can make some assumptions about them, but then we don't necessarily know a lot of specifics about them. If I introduce a character as, a berserker, which is like the first class in Realis, I can make some assumptions about what a berserker is. Other players might have some assumptions, but through play, that berserker will become will either become a really more specific character or will reveal the specificity and individuality that they have. Okay. Getting some more mechanic stuff here, right? Every player character starts with 4 class sentences. You have 2 bond sentences. You have a dream sentence. The book says, a dream is a special, single-use, extremely powerful sentence that all player characters begin with, representing some deeply held goal or ideal. Read about dreams on page 39. The dream sentence gets discussed in the two-player example game, so you can refer to that as well. And the token. Every player has one token, which can either be charged or discharged, right? It has two states. All tokens begin charged. A charged token may be used for one of these effects. So for the length of a conflict, you can add +1 reality to a chosen means, right? So a +1 sentence can be treated as a +2 sentence. You can use an established moon sentence as a means, right? Normally, the player characters don't necessarily get to use moon sentences as their own means. The token will let you do that. And third, if a slot is available on the current moon sheet, right? Moon sheets have a certain number of slots to establish sentences that describe the reality of that moon. If there's a space available, you can add a new +0 moon sentence representing some capacity or characteristic of the moon in question. If you are currently in a conflict, you may use this new moon sentence as a means, right? So it's sort of like a 2B compared to the 2A of use an established moon sentence. But there's enough of its own thing going on that it makes sense to flag as its own different thing, because this is a narrative currency, right? You may use your token to assert something or to declare something that is a reality of the moon, this particular moon, or whatever area you are in that has its own set of moon sentences, right? This Realis is a land of 1,000 moons, and so moon is being used here, as I understand it, as like the space that you are in, right? The environment that you are in. So a character has an impulse. All classes belong to one of 9 spheres, which are categories around a shared impulse. The sphere of sorcery's impulse is respond to a mundane problem with magical means. Certain places may offer their own impulses. Yazarin has an impulse, unmake something important to you. Characters who use a sentence in pursuit of an impulse recharge their token immediately. But pursuing an impulse is also valuable in and of itself because they're a reliable method of creating drama and keeping the story moving. A noble goal. So, right, you have your own impulse that comes from your sphere, and then places have impulses where it's like, oh, okay, if I'm in a gambling den, right, that gambling den might have the impulse. I think the impulse either for the character or of the place in the demo game was like, make a bad bet, right? If you're in a place that is about gambling, that place is going to try to act on you in a way to make you gamble and therefore lose money because the house always wins, right? A battlefield might have the impulse lash out with anger. All right. Collectively, sentences, bonds, dreams, and ephemera are referred to as means. Tokens affect or allow you to use certain means, but they are not themselves means. Okay. We've got some group creation stuff happening here, right? Your group, your band will have a band sentence. That's B-A-N-D, like a group, not, or like a group, musical or otherwise, as opposed to B-A-N-N-E-D, band restricted. But maybe there's some wordplay there at some point. Right, so we have some example band sentences here. A team of researchers digging into the strange mysteries of Realis. Their band sentence is, when we work together, we always uncover what time has hidden. So it looks like band sentences have the root structure of when we work together, and then you specify what happens. Right? The walkthrough of like your process says, we should take a break here. I like having a break built into the structure. And then before starting, revisit your foundation sentences, gather play materials, study the band, prepare the moons, right? This is kind of for the GM to do. Got some more art here. conversation, right? The conversation and kind of a dialectical process is at the core of Realis, right? Austin Walker has joked that yes, as a Marxist, he made a game about the dialectical process. But I think the dialectical process is a useful model to keep in mind for a collaborative storytelling game because it posits players and GMs as more equal actors. There are some games in play where it feels like the player is a supplicant going to the GM. Oh, GM, is there something in this room that I can use? Like, is there a pot that I could use to bonk one of the guards on the head? And the GM says, yes, I will allow this of you, right? Or the player has to spend a resource for there to be a pot. In other games, the assumption of narrative authority between players and GMs is closer, right? There's less of a gap. And a player might be invited to say, we're in a kitchen, I pick up a pot and bonk one of the guards on the head, because it's very reasonable for there to be a pot in that place. Established fiction, you are in a kitchen, implies that having a pot be there is very sensible and would not disrupt the integrity of the story. And if we had a game where the GM says you are in a kitchen and a player says, great, I pick up a pot and bonk one of the guards, and the GM says, no, there's no pots in here. Well, why are there no pots in a kitchen? Now, maybe the GM says, you enter a kitchen and it's oddly empty. All of the pots and pans and plates and implements are put away, and you cannot tell the last time that someone has cooked here. If the fiction is more thoroughly established, it can kind of it can close the door on some possibilities, right? The GM has established that there are no pots and pans out and about. Now, a player might say, during this fight, I'm going to wildly open cabinets and look for a pot that I can use as a weapon, right? That's a very understandable statement or assertion that a player might make, but I'm searching for a thing, takes more steps to get to I bonk the guard on the head than I pick the thing up that it makes every bit of sense is already there and I bonk them on the head. So here in the third paragraph, the book says, though Realis is driven by a set of rules to help resolve interesting conflicts, much of play will happen through conversation alone. Right? There's going to be times when playing Realis, I bet that if you were playing other games, the GM might call for a roll. And there are probably times when a player might say, oh, well, because I have sentence X, can I tell something, right? The GM may not call for a conflict there, right? They may think about the class sentences or some other aspect of the character and then decide that this kind of mechanical process is not required. Right? The fewer instances of using or invoking the primary conflict or task resolution system that there are in a session, the bigger a deal those instances should be, is a design rule that I tend to follow or believe in, right? If in a session of a game, your roll, and you're playing for 3 hours, and you make 20 rolls, the 7th roll doesn't have to be as important because there's another bunch of rolls after it to continue to adjust or redirect where the narrative is going. If there are 4 rolls in a 3-hour session, every one of those rolls is probably going to be a major turning point of the fiction. I don't think it's necessarily true that there's a perfect number of rolls that you should make in a 3-hour session, but there are certain, I think that D&D 5e, especially at low levels, is a really good game for comedy because the game is so swingy. And so that you can do things like call for a roll for something very basic, so that you could have a situation where your sneaky rogue rolls really poorly to climb up something, and they slip and fall. Then you have to figure out how to do that in a way that doesn't undermine that rogue's skills, but is instead a source of comedy in some other way. That can kind of be a challenge if you're not trying to go for that comedic mode, and it may take some other kind of creative or collaborative work to make that frequency of roll fit what everybody is looking for from the game. But some folks like rolling dice a lot. Right? They want to be able to roll the dice, so they want more chances to roll the dice, or they want a more frequent intervention of uncertainty through randomness into play. Right? Because if we have a continuum, the fewer times that uncertainty comes into play, the more we are in a place that is kind of pretty similar to just collaboratively written fiction, right? I was the lead writer and creator of a series called Born of the Blade, which was collaboratively written fiction. We did not use any game mechanics in that. It was collaborative. There was back and forth. There was some, right, synthesis. There was thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right, an iterative refining process. But, right, we weren't using the system of sentences, right, because this game didn't exist when I was doing that because it was 2018, right? And I think Walker said that he's been working on it for like 4 years, right? Unscriven says, the rule I tend to follow is only call for a roll when failure matters. Yeah. I'm seeing that more frequently in games, right? They will say only roll when failure matters, or when there is a threat, right? Or when one of the other ways that I can think about it is I'm not interested in what failure looks like in this situation. And if I'm the GM and that's how I'm thinking about the moment, I'm probably not going to call for a roll, or I'm not going to frame it as uncertain, right? Maybe it is uncertain, but failure in this position would just be an annoying sidetrack. And so I might just outright say that. I've said that in games. I'm not interested in what failure looks like here. When I'm doing my best job, I leave space for a player to be like, I actually do have an idea of what an interesting failure might be like. And so I do want this to be uncertain, right? A player might state that because they may have some ideas about how failure could be interesting, right? Or could undermine a character's assumptions or lead them in a certain direction that will help the kind of character's story. And that's all cool. Much of the play will happen through conversation alone. Return here. We get more play examples. Something I want to shout out and commend in this Ashcan is that there are a ton of play examples. In the first, I would say, couple dozen pages, I feel like there is an example almost every other page, if not more frequently. And that is great, especially in a smaller book, right, where there's a smaller page count in total. That can mean that there are not as many examples because the creator is trying to give you kind of the bare bones version of what you need. But I think it may actually be the opposite, that in a smaller book, you need a larger proportion of examples, because in a 300-page book, if you have examples every 10 pages, right, then that's 30 examples. In a 40-page book, if you have 30 examples, that's a lot. But in a 40-page book, if you have an example every 10 pages, you only have 4 examples. Maybe that's not going to be enough, right? I don't know if it's like a sine curve or something, but in this book, especially because it is going for a design style that is, I would not say singular, but is working with and in a less popular design tradition, right? There's a page of touchstones later on. If this were a book that was more familiar, or that was more similar to a D20 adventure fantasy game, there may not need to be as many examples, because it may be relying on a more widely known and widely understood design tradition. So I like having a lot of examples here. It's better to have too many examples than not enough examples, in my opinion. Because if there's too many examples and someone starts to read an example and they don't feel like they need it, they can skip it. Now, maybe they're skipping an example they probably should have read, but this happens. The designer can do their very best job to lay out the information in a way they think is going to be most effective and most useful for a reader and player, but then it's on the reader and player to take that information and be able to process them themselves. And people process information in different ways, and an RPG book has to do several things, right? It's the thing you read to learn a game, but then it's also a reference text. And sometimes when engaging with a work as a reference text, what you're looking for is different, right? You want to be able to find exactly the thing that you're looking for very quickly because you're probably doing it during play, and you want the smallest amount of downtime where you're just looking down at your book and nothing is necessarily happening in the fiction. Now, sometimes with certain players, right, somebody will do a side conversation, that'll all be fine. But what a book has to do is different at different times for different people. So here is means in brief. The means of conflict resolution available to players are class sentences, bonds, dreams, tokens, and ephemera, right? So we've talked about class sentences. Bonds represent the relationships between your character and another band member. This is a mechanic that I'm seeing more frequently in the past, I'd say 10 years, plus or minus a little bit, right? That it's not just we expect that your characters will have relationships to each other, but we are going to put into the book the idea that absolutely your characters have relationships, and we're going to acknowledge that and encourage you as players to think about it, right? Either come up with your own, use this pick list, right? History or Hex in Apocalypse World is an early example of this in my play experience. It's not necessarily like the first game to do that. It's just one that stands out to me in my own kind of play lineage. Then you get something like, right, there's bonds in Court of Blades. I put character bonds in my Genrenauts RPG because I really love them. Having played a bunch of different Forged in the Dark RPGs, I found that when a game gave me a bonds system, it was easier to get to play my relationship to other player characters from the beginning, because I had at least one and often two baseline relationship notes between my character and theirs. It's two because I have one bond from my sheet that represents how I feel about the other character, and then they have a bond that represents how they feel about me, my character. And when those bonds are not a direct mirror of each other, what the other person thinks about you, you probably can create or imagine a implicit mirrored version of that is how your character thinks about the way that that character has expressed the way that they think about you, right? If another player character has a bond, and so let's say my character's name is Bob, and then Tony has a bond that says, Bob will never shut up, so I volunteer for solo tasks so that I can have some quiet, right? That implies something about Bob, my character. So one, if I really don't think that fits my character, I might have a conversation about, I don't know that I necessarily want to play that. But because it's Tony's perspective on Bob, right, there's a degree to which it's kind of just Tony's player's choice. So there's some negotiation that can happen there. But then if I accept this as reality, I can think about, how does Bob perceive this, right? Does Bob kind of then implicitly have the mirrored bond of Tony is always trying to get away from me. I don't know what I've done, right? Because my bond from Bob to Tony might be, I look up to Tony because when the chips are down, Tony never shies from a challenge, right? So that there's a degree to which I've got Bob wanting to spend time by where Tony is, and then Tony wants to spend time away from Bob. And that can create some useful tension that we can then play off of and use to be kind of narratively generative. And these bonds can change, right? I bet in Realis that these bonds can change, and there's times and places when you rewrite them to represent the evolution or the development of characters' relationships. Right, we referenced the dream here, which was discussed previously. So when you use the dream, as I understand it, using your dream sentence is like an auto win, right? It's a one time you can do anything as long as it is a fulfillment of your dream. But then you cross the dream off of your sheet. It is a one-time thing across a whole campaign. And a lot of what I'm seeing in the design and discussion of Realis is that it is meant to have, it's not necessarily like a 50-session campaign, but I would guess that a lot of games of Realis are going to be 12 to 20-something sessions, and that's a guess. And a guess anchored to what I remember from what Walker has discussed about Realis already. Also a little bit like how Friends of the Table plays, right? How many sessions are in a campaign of Friends of the Table, understanding that their sessions are very long. So tokens are not means, but they can create means, or they can let you utilize means. And then ephemera represent special items, training, factional allegiances, or other elements of your character's repertoire that develop during play. These can be used just like regular sentences, but do not become more real over time. Instead, they are consumed slowly with use, eventually losing their power, right? If you have an ephemera that is an armor-piercing pistol, it can have a narrative impact in a conflict, right? This kind of back and forth between means. It can have that impact so many times, but each of those times, right, you're using up some allotment or some supply of resource that are associated with that ephemera. A kind of result of this is that you don't just get a character saying like, I've got my pistol, it's a good pistol, it has the best stats of anything, I'm going to keep just making my pistol better, and I'm always going to use my pistol. Like, no, your character might continue to use that pistol, but it's not going to have that same mechanical manifestation as if this were a game where Great Laser Pistol had mechanical weight to it that was just eternal, right? Or you could start with Laser Pistol and you can make it a Great Laser Pistol, and then you can make it a custom Great Laser Pistol, right? It adds on coolness, but then you're just using your laser pistol forever. If you want a character who is consistently using that pistol, you may want to get other ephemera. You can still manifest and utilize that pistol, but then you're using the ephemera for their mechanical weight, and it may be that utilizing that system is going to create a bit more variety and fluctuation and dynamism in how the story manifests. Here I'm thinking a little bit about resources in Heart, the City Beneath, right? Understanding that Friends of the Table played Heart for the Sangfiel season, and I remember some discussion among the players of some weirdness around resources, right? Because you have to use them up. You use resources to clear stress, and right, the kind of push-pull of, I like having this resource because it says something about my character, but resources are meant to be used, right? And there's instruction in Heart that you should be handing out and using resources pretty frequently. This is kind of the way that things are in something like the Cypher system, right? Where you get ciphers there, or other games in the Cypher system, right? Where you get these one-off limited use kinds of things. I'm also reminded of Eat the Reich from Rowan Rickard and Deckard, where you have items that only have X many uses, and you are incentivized to use them because the last use of any item is better. So you're encouraged to like blow through your uses of items. You're going to pick up other items later. You get an extra, you get extra effect by using up an item instead of just hoarding items. I don't know that that's necessarily a one-to-one manifestation, right? I don't know that ephemera and the way that they work emerge from Walker and the Friends of the Table's experience of heart. It's just where my mind goes. Dramatic intents. Moi. In general, players and GMs who are acting should always declare dramatic intent. By dramatic, we mean that actors should describe large situation-changing outcomes. Try to describe your character's goal in narrative and not simply physical ways. I want to humiliate my rival in front of his peers is a stronger, more dramatic intention than I want to punch my rival, right? So here is a place where the game is asking players to think as storytellers. Not just what do you want to do, but what is your dramatic intent in this action? This is a way of clarifying, right? What do you want to have happen in the story is a question that can be answered by expressing your dramatic intent. Sometimes in other games, I will ask, what do you want this to do, right? Or what does this look like if it succeeds? What are you trying to get out of this situation? Those are different questions that kind of are fishing at or gesturing toward dramatic intent. Declaring dramatic intents has several additional benefits in playing Realis, the book says, including greater flexibility in storytelling. For instance, when trying to rescue your comrades from the corrupt Duke's dungeon, the intent, I want to free the prisoners, offers many interesting ways to interpret both success and failure. In contrast, smaller, more task-oriented intents, I want to pick the cell's lock, limit the potential number of outcomes, and it risks making your capable characters seem incompetent, right? If your intent is merely, I want to pick the lock, and you fail in the kind of the back and forth of this process, well, did you fail to pick the lock? But your character is a thief. Like what? Maybe does that not feel as good? This, to me, feels like is also gesturing toward a broader conversation in tabletop RPG design. I realized I was cutting off the top of the page, which is why I'm moving it here. In Blaze the Dark's Deep Cuts, the kind of optional supplement that John Harper released late last year, one of the rules modules posited said, hey, you can replace the action roll with a threat roll. And the idea there with the threat roll is that these characters are very competent. So when they do something dangerous, we are going to assume that most of the time they will do the thing they set out to do, but there might be a consequence. You can unlock the door, but somebody's going to hear you. You can unlock the door, but it's going to take you some time, and the bomb's clock is going to tick down. You can open the door, but there's a guard right behind it. None of those threats are you fail to open the door. The threats are someone will hear you. It will take longer than you think. There will be a nasty surprise on the other side when you open it. Those are threats that do not immediately negate success, but they complicate the fiction. And so I'm seeing designers talk about this tension or this the question of, are you rolling to see if you succeed, or are you rolling to see if you get what you want without a complication? Right? Because if you are rolling to get what you want without a complication, you can still get what you want, but a bad roll means that there's a complication or a worse complication. And it's definitely been my experience running games, especially something like a Forged in the Dark game, where a player says, I want to do XYZ. And I go, great, that's a cool thing. It's definitely the kind of thing your character could do. You've got 4 dice to do it. And then the player rolls and they come out 1, 2, 2, 3. Like, okay, why did the, tier 2 shadow expert ninja character fail to do something that a shadow should be able to do? Well, I don't know that I want it to be you failed to do that thing. Maybe instead is you get what you want and now it's a big problem. Right? So I did a thing in a Blaze in the Dark game where someone was searching for paperwork and rolled a miss, right? Nothing higher than a 3 in Blaze in the Dark. And what I did, if I'm remembering correctly, is I gave them the paperwork, but then the floor gave out under them. So they had the paperwork, but fell into a room filled with adversaries and were discovered. It's like, well, it kind of sucks for the sneaky character to be discovered, but they do get what they want in the situation, and I'm escalating things and I'm moving the fiction forward. So there are some ways in which that was better than, yeah, you spend some time and you just can't find it. Okay. Crickets. What's happening? You get what you want and it's a problem, right? Paperwork, but you spill the ink, so theft is obvious, right? That's certainly another option, right? You can think as the GM, what's a way in which the character can get what they want, but I'm still respecting the fact that the dice did not come up in that player's benefit, right? Or did not signal that the character get what they wanted in the way that they wanted it. There's a few solutions for this. One of those solutions is don't make them roll when failure doesn't seem sensible or when there isn't a cool consequence in mind. Another thing you can do is you can make a devil's bargain, right? And this is another thing that's in the Deep Cuts modules, and you can just use devil's bargain as like a framing device. Many games don't have it literally, but you can do it anyway because it's just a conversation. You can say, you will get this paperwork, but it's going to take you some time. And the player might go, oh, I don't want to take it some time. I want to roll. And then as the GM, you can say, okay, well, if you roll, it might still take some time, but what's another threat, right? A player's like, I don't want to deal with that consequence, right? Or that cost. I'm willing to accept uncertainty, right? And then maybe you fall back to a die roll. So that's another thing that I've been trying to think about. This often leads to fewer dice rolls in a session, which is another thing to keep in mind if you want and your players want some of that uncertainty from rolling. Notable, Realis does not have dice rolls as a core element of play, to my knowledge, right? Certainly not in the core resolution as I understand it, right? So uncertainty in Realis is more, I don't necessarily know what means are going to be brought to bear against me when I act, right? As the actor, I express my means, and then someone can counter me with their own means. So let's see. Can we get an example of this, right? So opposed but uncertain. Here we go. If an action is neither uncertain nor opposed, it always succeeds. But if an actor is trying to do something that the table believes to be fundamentally difficult or risky, the actor must declare intent and means, describing how they draw on their skills, connections, or equipment in order to succeed. In some cases, you might find that you're unopposed but uncertain. That you've encountered an unopposed but uncertain situation, which your character does not have the means to directly overcome. It may seem like this is a dead end, but remember to break big problems down into smaller ones and to always think laterally. You may not have a sentence that helps you directly impact the problem in front of you, but you may be able to use one in another context that helps make the current challenge less uncertain. You could also just attempt a different, less dangerous way forward. Remember, Realis is a conversation. So here, let's see if this example is an example that follows through on that, right? GM says, you're looking now at the dead cycle from the top of a nearby mountain. As a blackguard, my specialties are being sneaky and stabby. I don't think I really have the appropriate means. GM says, maybe not directly, but let's talk it through. The player says, so my class sentences are, I always get the drop on my target. I always coat my blade with a useful poison. I always disappear into the dark, and I always find a well-paying job. I don't suppose there's a really long shadow I can disappear into, is there? The GM, oh, that's cool as hell. I don't think there's one right now, but as you explore this little cliff top you're on, you come across a cairn of rocks. You could take those and pile them up toward the edge in order to cast a shadow you could hop into. That's very cool. The player says, bam, just like that? Well, let's say it takes you a little while, so your targets are going to get deeper in those ruins. And you'll be destroying the grave marker, and that's always dangerous. Player, why are you smiling like that? I hate it when you smile like that. Right? This feels very much like a manifestation of what I think of as Austin Walkery kinds of GMing, right? The GM's knowing smile is not something that is unique or singular to any one person, but that I feel like a glint of recognition in that based on my experiences, both individual experiences as a GM and as like a listener to Friends of the Table here. So I always disappear into the dark has some kind of magical manifestation, right? Being able to disappear into the shadow. So that is something that was either established earlier or the player is asserting, well, I can disappear into the dark. And then, be able to get, get somewhere, right? Oh, I can disappear into the shadow and then pop out of this other shadow. So that's partly a question of how we understand the class sentences. And then it's a question of, in what way can I interpret this, right? Can I apply it here? What do I need to do to be able to apply it here? Because we return to the conversation, well, I can't use these means. How can I move in the fiction or move the fiction so that I can then apply these means? That feels like a really big part of playing Realis, especially as your means become realized and become more specific, right? If you have a +2 means that is, I always disappear into the dark when no one can see me and when death is on the line, right? There's 2 limiters there. So I need death to be on the line, and I need, right, this other limiter, right? So you can either push yourself into a worse situation so that, it's a matter of life and death, or you manipulate the situation or find a different situation in order to be able to deploy those means, or you try to gain access to other means, right? An ephemera, you try to gain access to like a moon sentence or something like that. And that's just, it feels like a way of codifying how TTRPG play can apply in a lot of other situations. Depending on the way the game is built, what verbs does the game give you that have mechanical manifestation, right? In a Force in the Dark game, your actions are your kind of main verb buttons. They're not the only things you can do, but when there is uncertainty and danger and you're asked to use an action, those are your options, right? So it may come that to be that you see the world through those verbs, right? If we think about this in comparison to video games, a game that is mostly a shooter, right? You see the world in terms of what happens if I shoot it, right? And this applies in something like Destiny 2, right? Where in the raids or the dungeons, right? The more complicated mechanical systems, a lot of stuff will still come back down to shoot, jump, interact, right? Because those are verbs that you have in this game. You shoot it and it changes color and you're doing a puzzle. You jump on it and it does something, or you jump from thing to thing, or you go somewhere and you press the interact button. Those are your verbs. If you come to a situation, you're like, well, shoot it doesn't work, interact doesn't work, jump doesn't work. Well, what are your other verbs? Or how can you apply those same verbs in different ways? Action and counteraction, right? This describes you do the thing, someone has a counter. So here, I'm going to jump to an example. While Casey's figuring out what she wants to do next, Hassan, what are you up to? I think I'm about wrapped up with my repairs, GM, right? Do you have anything that could counter Yazarin's orbital defenses, always obliterate intruders, right? This is an instance where the GM is acting. Hey, this is going to happen. Do you have anything to do about it? And the player says, well, wait, just a second. And the GM says, we can work in montage. I don't expect Hansen to save the ship from the repair bay. Okay, right? I have the sentence, I always pilot my orphan vessel, the Pantaray, with great skill. Can I counter with that? The GM says, you can try. Those caltrops have come to life and began to close in on the ship. How do you use that, your sentence to counter the specific, right? I described orbital defenses. Oh, I've got this sentence. Can I use that? Yeah, probably. And then the GM is getting more specific, right? They are They're clarifying the fiction. Hey, remember those sharpened caltrops I mentioned earlier? Now these are closing in on you. How do you use this sentence to deal with this specific manifestation of these orbital defenses, right? Those caltrops are not their own different sentence. They are a manifestation of Yazarin's orbital defenses always obliterate intruders. Right, and so there's a clarification. Hey, is this a sentence that came up earlier? I forgot to mention it by name since she cleared it so quickly. So then Hassan's player says, if Atarak was able to beat it before as an actor with a +1 sentence, that means it's +0, right? So I should be able to counter it now just fine. And the GM says, yes, this is what you can do. You can, in fact, do that. But then asks the player to describe what it looks like. Right? In Realis, the defender wins on a tie. Right? Actor uses a +0 thing. Defender uses a +0 thing. Defender wins. Notably, a countered sentence cannot be used until a new scene. So you can't just assert the same thing over and over again until you get what you want, right? If you use a sentence and it gets countered, it's kind of been temporarily disproven, right? If I have a sentence, I always win in a one-on-one fight, and then I lose a one-on-one fight, I don't always win. Well, and the way that the game works, a statement of I always X is not actually always. It's just the thesis in a given dialectic that can be countered by an antithesis that results then in a synthesis that is not quite either of them, right? I always win a fight except in this instance, but not this one. Looking down here, determining when a scene has ended is up to the group. Think like storytellers. Embrace the tone and foundation sentences you set up in session 0, right? What kind of story are we in? In a tense and dreary campaign about the toil of war, it may make sense for a sentence to remain countered longer than a story about high adventure swashbucklers. This also is then implicitly saying that Realis is set up to be able to do both of those, right? The spirit of the law. Always say what using your means looks like, right? You don't just say your sentence. Say what you're doing and how that manifests the sentence. This is a way of kind of returning to the fiction, and it is a fun exercise for the player to go, here's the mechanics that I have. How does that manifest, right? It's not always going to be applied or executed in exactly the same way. These sentences represent the description or summary or distillation of a number of things that someone can do that reflect who they are or the situation they're in or the gear that they have. Hello, the kids are asleep. Yes, I believe that the dialectical element is in the book itself, and if it's not, Walker, the designer, has mentioned it in discussions about the game. So that's not my reading that I bring to it. It's something that was already established. But I think it's cool, right? Because it is very much how the conversation ends up working in an RPG. Well, I want to do this. But here's this other thing about the fiction, or here's my uncertainty about this thing that you're saying that happens. And then you go back and forth and you reach some kind of conclusion. Right. So if we look at this example, right, this example back up here, Yazarin's orbital defenses always obliterate intruders. But I always pilot my orphan vessel, the Pantaray, with great skill. Okay, right. So that's thesis, antithesis. We get more specific. Right. These sharpened caltrops have come to life and begin to close in on your ship, twirling in beautiful patterns. Yes, but the Pantaray howls and spins its way forward like what if a ship was a dolphin and space was the ocean. The light of Realis gleams off its armor painting as I drive it down toward the moon. Right? That's what happens in the fiction. That is the expression of thesis, antithesis. The synthesis is, here's what ends up happening. Right? The synthesis doesn't necessarily have a mechanical manifestation, but we do have the realization. Right? I'm still getting a sense of exactly how to describe it, how to manifest all of that, but I think I'm getting there. Spirit of the law, back in here. Consider how much flexibility. More play examples. Means in detail. Sentences. Right, we are about an hour and a half in, so I'm going to move a little bit more quickly for a bit, both to kind of skip past some pages and to try to get to some more advanced elements. Yes, here we go. So when you use means and they are countered, you put you tick a box. And then I think after a sentence has been countered 3 times, you can realize that sentence and its rank goes up, but it is limited in some way. But in contrast to realization, honing offers players a way to temporarily increase the reality of a class sentence. Once per session, you may mark one class sentence as if it had failed in a conflict, then increase its rank by 1 for the rest of the session by giving it a temporary condition as if they were realizing it. You may hone a class sentence at any point, but honing it after it has been compared to another means during a conflict neither changes the outcome of that conflict, nor does it recover a countered sentence, right? You have to hone before you apply, I think is what this is saying. Be sure to add the qualification in a parenthetical so that it's clear it's temporary. If you hone a sentence toward the end of a session, the GM can decide to extend the honing into the following session. Primed sentences, I think primed is when you have been countered 3 times. Let me double check where it says priming. Okay, I'm not finding that immediately. So for best practices on realization, see page 72. This is the downside of a read-through review is that a lot of these reactions are first impression reactions rather than a definitive explication. I got primed right. Cool, thank you, boy problems. D2. It's like boy problems and then there's something else. Yeah, there's some stuff about the game that's just in the back of my head already because of reading the interview and having listened to the demo game. But it's in my head, but not firmly attached to everything in terms of like knowledge that I can reproduce on command. So honing, I think honing is really cool because one, it is practice in figuring out how a means might become realized and kind of get refined down, right? So you can try out some different manifestations. You know, if my blade is always coated with a fluid, no, that's a +0, right? The means of a berserker, I always kill my foes. That's +0. If I hone that, I always kill my foes when I am unarmed. That is a honing that I could do. I could play around with what does that feel like to use in the fiction? How does this feel for my character? And it is a way of solving a problem, right? Okay, well, I'm not really in a great position to be able to use my +1 sentence, but I have this other sentence that's a +0. What if I hone it and I can hone it in a way that is applicable to this scene, right? You may want to think about a scene scale utility because it will apply for the session, right? Oh, okay, if we're in 0G, right, do I hone something that says, I always kill my foes when fighting in 0G? Okay, well, that's pretty useful in this situation. I may not necessarily want that to be what that sentence says when it's actually realized to +1, but it's very handy now. And it gives us a lot of flexibility because you can hone any of your class sentences so that when you're thinking about your ability to deal with or address a situation, right, you have your 4 sentences, but you also have the potential for any of those 4 sentences to be a different version of them, right? To be a higher rank version of them as if they had been realized. So you can kind of point or hone any of those 4 toward the particular situation or the challenge that you are trying to deal with. And if you have 4 players and they each have 4 class sentences, and any of them can hone any of their 4 class sentences, that's a lot of different options you have for modifying somebody's means to be able to address the situation, so that you're much less likely to end up in a situation of, well, I have a bunch of square pegs and we have a round hole. It's like, well, I've got a square peg, but what if I honed it into a circle, and then I can hit that round hole and exhaust this metaphor so I can move past it. So that's very cool. Sorry, so there's some kind of sound outside. It's a little distracting. Oh, it's like a vacuum or something. Sorry. So bonds. These are, from what I remember hearing, bonds are written in a way that's a little bit more traditional, right? They're not necessarily I always X. Do we have an example of a bond? I am always X. Okay, great. Here's a bond. Hassan doesn't approve of my techniques, but he always has my back. Can I use that to counter I am always unstoppable? So this one does say always, but it has a little bit of a different structure, right? It's this person, they do this, but they always do this. And now you could have a bond that is, Hassan doesn't approve of my techniques, and he's always ragging me about it, right? Hassan doesn't approve of my techniques, and therefore he never lets me out of his sight. All right, so that's a bond. That might be better as a bond for Hassan toward, that is Adarak's bond, right? Hassan doesn't approve of my techniques, and he never lets me out of his sight, right? That's another way that could be utilized. Right? So this is dreams. I think we've kind of covered dreams. Remember, once you have spent your dream, you cannot write another one. I'm curious what people will come up with in terms of house rules for using dreams in a one-shot or limited run game of Realis, right? We're going to do a one-shot. If I've got 4 players and they each have a dream, what's to stop them from each using their dream over the course of that one-shot and being able to blow through challenges? Well, it's basically the table agreement, right? We might have a foundation statement that says, we can never use our dream sentences in a one-shot, or only one player can use their dream sentence during this one-shot, right? We might write it into our foundation sentences so that we have it as a formal agreement. Or maybe it's fine to use your dreams, and the GM is just going to do their very best to put situations that speak to characters' dreams into the one-shot so that when the players use those dream sentences, they hit, right? That it works. And even more importantly, if we've agreed that everybody can use them, if there's never an opportunity to actually really aggressively take that action toward your dream, then you miss out on that ability, on the chance to use your dream and to have that really cool auto-succeed action that comes with the dream. While this dream may be modified over time, it's the only one, right? A dream, I don't think you go, okay, well, I'm going to refine my dream to +2, right? If a dream always succeeds, it's sort of like a dream is +4. I'm not sure if there's specificity or if it's just write the dream, don't write the magnitude down, and that's how you can remember, or just remember because it's a dream. Let's see, we have the dream here. Hassan's dream, I will retire to a life of quiet peace. Adarak, I will be the queen of all Realis, the 1,000 moons and the corpse sun. Okay, so they're looking at how to counter. They don't have a lot of options. So Hassan is going to spend his dream, I will retire, or I'm not sure about Hassan's pronouns. Hassan's going to spend the dream, I will retire to a life of quiet peace. This doesn't mean you can't retire to a nice cabin in the woods one day, but you won't be able to spend your dream to get it. Right? And so the manifestation is, I think Hassan closes his eyes. For a second, he sees himself standing in a little carpentry workshop. There's the sound of a stream a little ways away, some birds, a soft guitar maybe. I think he's measuring something, a piece of wood or something, really carefully. He's focused. Like, it's really important that this cut is 7 millimeters and not 8. He's concentrating, but he's happy. It's a good image. Right? That's the manifestation of the dream that then leads him to be able to succeed in this situation. Right? So here we've got more on tokens. Boosting the rank of a means. Just looking through this. You do not have to write or modify the sentence when you use this boost, right? It's only for the moment. But players should describe how they're drawing on something extra to succeed, right? You've got something extra in the tank, or there's a specific bit of knowledge or some luck. Moon, 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 moon sentences. Moon's haunted. Moon has always been haunted, right? One moon sentence is, does every moon have the sentence, name of moon is haunted, right? In your Realis game of destiny, then I think that's a moon sentence for everything. Or you have a foundation sentence that says every moon is haunted, but then you don't get to draw on that for means in a situation. This is a joke, right? So something that's going to be important in play is learning moon sentences. Because if the players know the moon sentences, then they can use them by spending their token, I believe. They can create new moon sentences by using their token. And something that's noted here on page 44, no sentence may be used on both sides of the same conflict. So if a player uses a moon sentence as the actor, the GM cannot use that same sentence as a counter. This shows up in Ashcan and Jack's example that was released yesterday, right? Jack's character already knew one of these moon sentences, and so Jack had their character utilize that sentence, and then Austin as the GM did not have that sentence to use to counter, right? So there's an information economy dimension of Realis that I'm very curious about, right? When does the GM have to say the whole sentence to use it, right? Is that only when they're using it as an actor, right? Hey, can you counter this? What does it take to learn a place's moon sentences, right? Does it always take an action that can be met with a counter, right? We get some examples of learning or knowing moon sentences in the play example that was last night, but I imagine that in the next few episodes that are released on the Friends of the Table feed, we're going to get some more information about how you learn moon sentences. I will also get more information when I just read this book and I'm not on a stream, because I'm going to be much more thorough. So tokens. I like that there's one token. I think there'll probably be times when you might wish you had multiple tokens, but this is less upkeep, and it makes every use of the token a bigger deal. It means you can't hoard your token, right? It's only one use. You can't have extra uses of the token. You could probably line up a situation so that you know you can use your token, act on your impulse, and then use your token again. But that's just writing, baby. Ephemera, this is using stuff, right? Ephemera do not need additional limitations to be more real, right? You can have a +3, the index key always opens any lock. Or a lower ranked sentence means can have restrictions. +1, when held by loving hands, the living razor is always lethal against the ancient undead, right? So there's multiple axes of utility. What's the rank of this sentence? How limited is it in the way that it's written? and then how many uses, right? Looks like by default, ephemera have 3 uses. Some example ephemera. When it's sunny out, my solar grav pack always lifts me to new heights. Our new friendship with the blood coral always gives us access to impenetrable places. My connection to the inner wolf always grants me an unending hunger and the unstoppable power necessary to feed it. Inside you, there am one wolf. It's very hungry. All right, here is a conflict in brief. We've got some do's and don'ts. Don't tell your story in a defensive posture. Realis is not Twitter. You do not have to pre-qualify everything to hell and back in the hopes of not being swallowed by discourse. This makes me very glad. Do come at big problems sideways. Do respect and build from consequences. Don't cling on to tokens and ephemera, right? But sort of what I mentioned a little bit earlier, that if you have one token, you can't just like hoard tokens. You just got to use it. Don't repeat a conflict unless the situation has changed, right? So you probably don't want a conflict that is, I hit them with my sword, right? Where you have the conflict of, I always win a one-on-one fight, I hit them with my sword. It should probably be, if I'm understanding it correctly, something more like, I dispatch my foe because I always win in a one-on-one fight, right? And then you reference your sentence, I always win in a one-on-one fight. And then you describe what that looks like, right? They may be skilled, but I'm faster. And after a few exchanges and some maneuvering around the room, I identify a weakness in their form. And as they raise their great hammer, I kind of lunge forward and thrust upward, and my sword goes up to the hilt through their ribs. Then the GM might say, but I'm going to counter with +0. The Juggernaut can never fall in battle, right? And then, you might describe what the player does, and then the GM will describe what happens instead of, and then you bury your sword up to the hilt. Or maybe, and then you bury your sword up to the hilt, and the Juggernaut follows through, their great hammer coming down on you to crush you, right? It's like, well, if the player was acting on that, right, then maybe the hammer comes down, the player character is not crushed, but right, the stab doesn't kill them, right? This is, you fail to overcome the challenge in this situation. And like any game, you're going to develop some fluency of what this all feels like. But I love, 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 love that everything is still expressed in terms of fiction and of describing what your character is doing. I feel like for a lot of people that love fiction-first gaming, the fiction-y shape of so much of how this game is designed is going to feel really good and will help players feel like they can maintain their connection to what is happening in the fiction more readily because of the way that the game is asking them to hold things in their mind, right? It's not asking them to hold things in their mind that are maybe more likely to take up so much of your time and attention that you kind of have to break and pull yourself away from thinking about what's happening in the moment, right? All these mechanics feel like they lie really closely on top of the fiction, if not sitting in the fiction, right? The image that comes to mind is like surface tension, right? If you look at a little bug, content note for bugs, just jump forward like 15 seconds if you're not a bugs person. When a bug's little legs are on the water, right, they kind of go a little bit into the water because the surface tension keeps the leg from going into the water up to a certain point, right? That is the rules and in the fiction of the water. Okay, in the end of session, we do some progression stuff. If you work toward achieving your dream, you mark a dot next to one of your means, right? If you pursue your dream, you can advance your means. The dream doesn't advance, but pursuing the dream helps you advance. Choose one means that shaped how you played your character, but with but which you did not mark during play, and then you get to mark it, right? So thinking about all of your sentences, not just the one that you're trying to use in the given moment. And this is one means, right? So it could be your bond, it could be an ephemera, and some of these other ones. Write down whether you have your token, right? Current status. Review your means, make sure everything was marked fine. Review bonds, streams, and banned sentences. I dig this landscape art. Okay, we have a note about PC versus PC conflict, which is very important. This is beyond the basics. We're coming up on an hour 45. So I'm going to, here we've got some play examples. I'm going to kind of try to zip through and pull out some other notable elements. All right, so here's some example GM sentences. Venerant sea crusaders always punish non-believers, right? That's easy to understand how you manifest that. You describe some crusaders, and once it's clear that these characters are non-believers, okay, what do you have to counter venerant sea crusaders always crush non-believers? We have Empest facilities always perplex outsiders who dare breach them, right? So if the characters know about this sentence, right, or understand it as a truth in the world, oh yeah, but everybody knows Empest facilities always perplex outsiders who dare breach them, right? You maybe wouldn't say literally that in the fiction, but you might say, oh yeah, my cousin tried to break into an Empest facility, and like she couldn't make hide nor hair of the computer systems. We're gonna need a map, right? If a player knows about the sentence in a way that the character also knows, the player can reframe or present that sentence into the fiction because that sentence represents a reality of the fiction that has to be addressed, right? A reality that has to be overcome, right? X is always... It is always such that X, we have to create an exception. Moons, 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 moons. I expect that in like another week or so, there will probably be a special moon emoji on the Friends at the Table Discord, if there is not already one. There's several moon emojis, right? Because Partisan is a moon. I don't remember if Palisade is also a moon. So there might be several special moon emojis. But there'll be a Realis moon emoji. We shall see. Play to find out. Play in this case is being on the Friends of the Table Discord. Moon sentences differ from other GM sentences in two key ways. They tend to be more descriptive and less pointed. Like faction sentences, moon sentences begin at rank 0 and advance the same way that class sentences do. Okay. Right, so if a character, right, if these moon sentences are showing up in play and they're getting countered, then those can advance and they will become more specific as we learn more about the moon. Right, so Orienel dressmakers always set the trend, and then we figure out, okay, we've seen this reality expressed and challenged in some ways, and then we're going to refine it. Right, we realize it into some other, some kind of new manifestation, right? When nobles go to war with smiles and tucked lapels, Orienel dressmakers always set the trend. Right, that can be a realization of this moon sentence. And that realization can flow from the fiction, should flow from the fiction. Right? Maybe Quittel fields always resound with work songs was the +0, and it becomes bitter work songs, +1, as we come to understand the unhappiness of the workers in Quittel. Right? The undying engine of Dannelly always burns at +0. the undying engine of Danley always burns so long as the heretic king reigns. Maybe our plus one version. Eliminating failure. Got some tips for realization, right? You can realize via circumstances, target, effect. Got a bunch of examples here, which is great, right? Because the realization is that's on all y'all. There are lists of sentences in the book, right? You get the class sentences, but the book does not, to my knowledge, give you, here's all your options of realization. That's not what game this is. Those options are your decision at the table. Notable here that sentences can retire, right? They get stronger and stronger and more narrow. But when you would prime a +3 sentence, instead you retire it. That sentence goes back to +0 and now becomes past tense. I always got the drop on my target, or I was always unstoppable. And this is a retired sentence. You can still use it, but it has to be usable in the retired form, right? So if you have, I always got the drop on my target, well, you don't now, but because I always got the drop on my target, I'm used to telling when somebody is acting strangely. This is not necessarily getting a drop on your target in that moment, but maybe it can still be utilized in some way. Right? Maybe your retired sentence can be used for getting information because as somebody who used to X, you should have certain types of information. Be sure to keep your character's original sentences available somewhere so that you can refer back to kind of where things came from. If all 4 of your class sentences are retired, it's time for the character to retire too. Ending your story. Right. Okay. So here we get some classes. Let's just look at a couple of classes before we move on. The Berserker is the first class, right? Berserk, the manga and anime, is referenced as a influence on Realis here, right? And so we have a Berserker. Class sentences. I always kill my foe. I always carry an unstoppable weapon, right? These doodads here represent this weapon is going to have some like mechanical weight, is what I remember hearing about this, right? I always learn through violence. I always hurt those close to me, right? You can charge your impulse. Like, I don't remember exactly the bit about impulses, right? But this sentence is a way for you to set yourself up for failure, right? There's a thing you can do that is, hey, I'm going to intentionally screw something up. And that will let me recharge my token, if I'm remembering correctly, right? So you can, well, because I always hurt those close to me, right? After a battle, I'm going to say that, right, I'm covered in blood and this character comes up to try to comfort me and I lash out at them, XYZ, right? Because I'm still angry or something. I'm going to manifest, I always hurt those close to me, right? And then we do the conflict maybe, or the GM, if it's another player character, we figured out the kind of PC versus PC thing. If it's an NPC, there maybe is a conflict, or it may not even raise to the level of a conflict because the other player involved might say, yeah, absolutely, you do that, right? Especially if the player's like, hey, I think that this makes sense for my Berserker to lash out emotionally about somebody. If everybody else in the group is like, yeah, actually that absolutely is what makes sense, right? Then you can just kind of proceed. So there are ways that you can intentionally play your character to create problems for themselves and others, and you can get a resource benefit from that. Plus, a lot of people love having a thing on their character sheet that's like, yes, this is how I'm a fuck up. This is the button that I press to be a fuck up. All right, so we have your sentences, bonds, characters. Weakness makes them vulnerable. It is my responsibility to protect them. character is wise in the ways of the world. I can rely on them to act when strength is not enough, right? I must act over them. I must act for them. I can rely on them to act for me, right? So these bonds have different levels of like responsibility and who is acting and how this character sees their world and their place in the world. It is my responsibility to protect, but I can rely on someone else to act when strength is not enough, which then says that the berserker believes that their strength is what they have to offer to the world. But I always hurt those close to me. And then we have some example dreams, right? You don't have to take one of these. These are just giving you some inspiration. I will be the greatest warrior ever known across the 1,000 moons. Oh, I don't think this comma. Oh, I will be the greatest warrior ever, comma, known across the 1,000 moons. That's fine. Having the comma or not changes some of what that actually does as it manifests. Right, I will be the greatest warrior ever, comma, known across the 1,000 moons. That's ever, period, versus I will be the greatest warrior ever known across the 1,000 moons, right? Among the 1,000 moons, I will be the greatest warrior, right? We can interpret those differently. I will find transcendent clarity in the midst of battle and become my truest self. Interesting, right? Like, is this a way that the berserker ends up retiring not as a berserker, right? Maybe is there a way that a character could change their class, right? Changing your playbook is a thing that happens in some PBTA games. All right, so we have duelist, peregrine, some class names in this book. I tell you what, syzygist, right? Syzygist, esoteric, theologicent, witch, quintessent. I'm pronouncing this as blackguard, right? Blackguard is blackguard in the same way that like jailer was spelled Goaler. Runner is like a net runner or like a street runner. I'm going to scroll through this a little bit faster now. So if scrolling screen is a problem for you, then just look away for a little while and I'll tell you when I'm done. Okay, so I'm done with that. And now let's just take a couple minutes to look at some setting elements. Here we get another cool piece of art. This is a piece about Yazarin. The 1,000 Moons, an introduction. Here is our knowledge complete. The colossal world of Realis is orbited by multitudinous moons and is driven by the natural laws of identity and change. The sentence is its lifeblood, conflict its heart, and story the body made alive. Hell yeah. All else than this is knowledge incomplete, reflecting simple observation, speculation, investigation, and reasoning, but absent the transcendental aspect necessary for true certainty. Some Austin Walker fiction-ass shit writing if there ever was, son. Love it. Realis itself is a massive blue world, which only a few dozen have ever landed on and returned from. Those that have are called radiants. Some live as demigods. Others sit in mysterious meditation. And many are frauds. Right? So you can have a whole campaign that is, we're going to get to Realis. We're going to be radiants. Or we're going to get to Realis so that we figure out what have the radiants seen or done that makes them so special, right? That is the reason why some sit in meditation and some live as demigods. 1,000 Moons, big wide setting, right? You can just moon hop many different moons. Orphan vessels are sentient ships because, as we know from the Divine Cycle, what if a mech was a person is great. Orphan vessels don't have to be mechs, but this is how I see the progression. Right? This follows from that. Technology is spread unevenly. This means you can have different moons with different tech levels, right? You can have different vibes. This world is more like Weird Western-y. This world is more like cyberpunk-y. This world is more like sword and sandal-y. Right? We've got some factions. The Leo suzerainty. a feudal confederation driven by the spiteful ambitions of its bickering nobles. The imperial empest, a once august empire, now voracious, glistening, and insectoid. The Gilead Consortium, a small but wealthy nation which wields both cynical mercantilism and civil condescension. The Free Moons Assembly, a loose coalition of tribes, travelers, and outcasts determined to map the moons. All right, and so here's some other stuff. Factions can have sentences. Something that I remember, I think this is Walker talking in the demo episode, was using Realis at kind of a wide scale, right? I could certainly imagine using the dialectical system as a faction turn system, right? That every turn, each faction asserts one of its faction sentences to try to make a change in the world. And then someone can try to counter them, right? And you figure out what the ecosystem of, do these have tokens? What are the options for boosting? How does realization work, right? Realization can be a manifestation of the way that factions progress, right? Because if you realize and reach a higher rank, you're able to overcome greater and greater opposition in pursuing a particular goal, right? If you have the Imperial Empest consumes all before it, or always consumes what lies before it. Well, that's at +0. They use it, it gets countered, they realize it to the Imperial Empest, when acting in numbers, always consume what is before them, right? And then that +1 gets another qualification on it, or a limitation of effect or something, right? So that then they're able to do more and more. And theoretically, each of these factions is also realizing their sentences, and you have some balance back and forth, right? This is, because it's really flexible, it is a system that could theoretically sit on top of another system if you want to be able to do that thing of moving back and forth, zooming in and out between something that's more traditional, here's your party kind of play, and something that's looking more broadly at a faction level, right? Will there be faction level play in this campaign of Realis that Friends of the Table does? I could certainly imagine that, right? Thinking about the microscope game in Counterweight and the faction turn stuff in Palisade and so on. So we've got example sentences here, right? Here's this faction. Here's a bunch of different options, right? Some NPCs and their sentences, right? So this is pre-prepared, pre-existing material. Hey, you want to have the Leo suzerainty? What was that? The Leo suzerainty in your game. Here's some example stuff. Here's what they're about. Here's some more details. And now you can use this, right? The fulminant, right? This feels like it's informed by Fulmina, goddess of immediate justice from Sangfiel, or just because, right, somebody likes this word. Here's factions. I'm going to scroll a bit more down to the very bottom to see if there's anything else that I want to shout out. So scrolling here, and I will let you know when I am done. Okay, here we are almost at the end. Customizing Realis. And we have this great piece of art. So, right, this is an incomplete game. Make the game your own. Make it yourself, make it your own. All right, this is not going to be a game probably where anybody's going to tell you you're doing the setting wrong, right? Everybody creates their own interpretation. There may be some interpretations that are more of a counter to the text as it exists, and there are some interpretations that are going to be looser than others. But the single most important part of customizing Realis is that you do it, right? Don't be beholden to what is written here. Take what is written here and hone it toward what you want. Take what is written here and realize it into the version that you need in the moment for the game that you are playing. As we see it, the value of this game is the ease with which you make it yours, And here's some more fiction-y stuff, right? This is an afterword, but it is in the fiction. And here's some listing of inspirations on page 126. And there's some playtest groups. I'm not going to go to the last page because there's a thing that's, I think, a spoiler for the Friends at the Table series of Realis. So I'm not going to show that. All right, looking at these touchstones, this is a lot of science fantasy, but there's also stuff like The Fall, directed by Tarsim Singh. There is Star Wars. We have, right, Fellowship is like a fantasy adventure game. But then we have Electric Bastion Land, and Ultraviolet Grassland 2E, Ultraviolet Grasslands in the Black City, right? This kind of like psychedelic, weird fantasy is not a thing that I have engaged with as much. It looks really cool, right? And the stuff like comics, right? The Incal by Jodorowsky and Mobius, and some of these other things, right? The richness of the visuals is really cool. It sometimes is attached to other things that I'm not as into, but if I'm going to be playing or running Realis, I'm going to, one, want to bring my own touchstones to the game, and two, if other players have a connection to or an affection for some of these other touchstones that I don't know, we may discuss whether, like, how much do they want to bring to it, right? If I'm GMing and somebody wants to bring touchstones to something, I may ask them to present some examples, like, is there a picture that you feel best expresses what you like about this touchstone? Or can you tell us a bit more about what from this touchstone you want to bring to the game, right? That can be a really useful process. For a actual play that I did with Speculate, one of the touchstones was the film Paprika. And so that group, we all just got together because we were already friends, right? We played together. We got together and watched Paprika together on Discord, right? And then we were talking about it. And therefore it was able to help us have more of a shared vision of what we were going for. Right. As The Kids Are Asleep says, specifics can help you move past vibes. Yeah. Right. Because everybody has their own relationship to a given vibe, right? Like if I say vaporwave, and it's like, oh yeah, we're going to have a vaporwave game. Okay. There's a lot of different things that can be vaporwave, right? If I say, I want the dreamy, uncertain, kind of nostalgic 90s sense of vaporwave, that is a lot more specific, right? Here is the thing, here is how I'm seeing it, and here is the way that I want to apply it. That can be a useful process when you're thinking about the touchstones for your game, right? You can put touchstones as foundational sentences. Our game will always feel dreamy and the world of our game will always feel dreamy and remind us of being on the internet in the 1990s, right? You could put that in there if you want, right? So The Kids Are Asleep also says, something you might think of as narrow, like Sword and Sorcery. Do you want the Heritage kind, the Conan kind, the Elric kind? Absolutely, right? Specificity is powerful in the same way that a high rank sentence has gotten more and more specific. So there you go. I like a lot of this. I'm very excited. This is a game that will take folks with a particular set of interests, right? I don't think I would not present this game to the same people that I would present any number of other games, but that's neither here nor there. The things that I think make this game special mean that I'm really excited about them, but they may take a little bit of contextualization and may take a bit of work getting everybody on board with them, because it's doing some things that are more different in some ways than a lot of other games, right? I definitely feel the influence of Dream Apart, Dream Askew by Avery Alder and Benjamin Rosenbaum in terms of the kind of focus on text and the lack of dice and the way that tokens can apply. Legacy Life Among the Ruins, right, is a multi-generational faction kind of game where change, I think, plays a big part. So that all certainly makes sense to me. Dragon's Dogma, of course. This reminds me that I want to go and look at more of Hyperlight Breaker, I think, is the new Heart Machine game. It's a prequel to Hyperlight Drifter. And I dug a lot of stuff about Hyperlight Drifter, but I did not get that far in it because it was both hard and did not explain itself. And not explaining itself was part of what is some of what is fun, but it meant the way that the storytelling emerged did not compensate for the places where the difficulty created like a stonewall for me, compared to something like Hades, where you can keep dying and the story will parcel out the game will parcel out new bits of story for you. And these are just different games with different design styles. So I'm going to scroll a bunch again real quick because I'm going to go back to the top. So this has been a read-through look at Realis, the Ashcan version by Austin Walker, published by Possible World Games. I thank you all for coming to hang out and hear what I have to say as I try to figure out more about how this game works and what is interesting and cool about it. As a reminder, you can buy this now on itch.io. You can also go to Possible World Games and find out more about the game, get a link to buy it. The plan as described is for a complete version of this game to be published later this year or next year, potentially with a crowdfunding campaign. So if you liked what you saw, I would invite you to consider buying the game or getting the game for your group or putting it on some kind of wish list, right? Whatever your means may be. Because it is digital, you can't necessarily go to your library and get a copy, but it's possible that there will be community copies at some point. If, again, that's not up to me. I would love to see it happen, but I don't know the publishing particulars of Possible World Games or what is going on there. And I absolutely want Austin to get paid because he, as a creator, Austin Walker has made a lot of stuff that is available for free. And so putting out a paid product like this is a place where he can make some money, and being able to make some money when the world is especially bad is a great thing. And so I'm happy to have this opportunity to have paid for the good work that Austin and these other folks have done. And I'm very excited to see Possible Worlds doing some more publishing. It was something that I learned was happening sometime last year when I got to talk with Tyler Krumrine, the publisher at Possible Worlds, at one or another convention. So I'm excited to look at other stuff that Possible Worlds is publishing. And if you don't know Possible Worlds games, but you know Realis or you know me, I would invite you to go and take a look at some of those other games because there's a variety of pretty cool stuff. So as a reminder, I am Mike Underwood. You can find more stuff about me at michaelrunderwood.com. I am trying to stream more here on my Twitch. It's going to be a mix of TTRPG streams that are read-through analyses like these, my own design streams as I talk through things or talk about design that I'm doing, or like player and GM advice, right? When Daggerheart comes out, I'm expecting to do a number of streams that are like unpacking aspects of Daggerheart or Q&A or other stuff like that to help support people as they're getting into and playing that game. I'm also going to do some amount of streaming video games because Citizen Sleeper 2 Starward Vector comes out a week from today, and I'm very excited. So it might be fun to stream that here. So if you enjoyed this, I would love if you consider following the channel here, or if you are watching on YouTube, you can subscribe there. And those are ways to get quick access to the videos in the future when I do them. So thank you again for hanging out with me and watching, whether that was live or it is on an archive somewhere. So thanks specifically to The Kids Are Asleep, to Triffity Mats, to Unscriven, and to everybody else who is hanging out here, there, or anywhere. Take care.